Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
Hi, Frankie.
Hello.
Frankie.
Hey, sweeties. How y'all doing? That's good. That's excellent to hear. Bracken, I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. I really like the inside of your flat.
You what, sorry?
I really like the inside of your flat. I really like how you have it decorated. This back wall thing here, it's very cool.
Yeah,
it's really good and nice.
A cow.
Oh.
Yeah.
Aww.
So cute.
Does the cow have a name?
Yeah,
There.
Rory is here. I'm gonna turn my I'm gonna go on mute because I'm gonna be cooking and it's gonna make noises, okay?
What you cooking? What you cooking?
Struggle fancy ramen. So ramen from a packet but with fancy things on top.
Ooh, solid choice.
Nice.
How are you, Andrada?
Good. I did my first isolations class earlier and it was cool. It was nice. I was nervous.
I bet you smashed it.
It worked out really well.
I'm really glad. I'm really glad. That's so cool. Are you going to do more?
Yes. It's a chunk of 6.
Are they... can I know more? Am I allowed to know more?
Can I do a completely shameless plug-in a bit later so that more people can hear about it?
Fuck yeah. Fuck yeah, you can. Em's here. Hi, Em. And hi, Tara. And Alex is here. Hi, Alex.
Oh,
nice to have you along.
thank you. I listened to the catch up, so I know what's happening, kind of. Good to go.
It'll hopefully it'll all make itself clear as we go through.
I think I've got enough that it should.
Excellent.
Book this one if not.
I'm thinking about this message and Rory catch me up if I'm distracted from something, and I'm like, what the fuck just happened?
I missed that, my darling. What was that? My audio got disrupted.
Oh, worst case, I'll just message Bracken and Rory because they're who I usually message if I miss something, and I'm just like, what the fuck just happened?
Amazing. Hi, Katie. Hi, honey pie. How are you doing?
Good. I just made bread and it rose.
Ooh, can we see? See? Zach's here. Hi, Zach. Hi, Zach. Hi, Sarah. Oh, look at that.
Ooh, that is pretty.
Look at that.
Oh, and Michael has bread too.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Michael's bread.
Hi, bread friend.
Bread friends. Oh, God. This is very wholesome. Whole meal-some. Oh, come on. Come on.
Come on, Dad.
Pearls before swine. I don't know why I bother with people.
How has your day been, Frankie?
I think it's been good. How have I spent my day? Hi, Zach's face.
Mostly speaking to me.
Mostly speaking to you. I've had a lovely day hanging out with alternately Zach and Martin. I haven't been alone once, which is all I really care about in life.
John,
John, yes, I had a talk with John about the work and stuff that I've been doing, and he's happy for me to continue doing that work, which is cool. And we talked about a potential new project which I'm going to start researching on in tandem, which is a more kind of wide-ranging field, and I get to just read and research about what I fancy and see if I can find something to kind of narrow in on, but it's going to be about props and puppetry. Ooh. Ooh. Going to be some Jim Henson shit all up in this bad boy. Hi, Ashura. So yeah, pretty Pretty good day. Hi, Jonathan.
Tahini porridge, important part of the day.
Tahini porridge with banana and honey. It's very good. It's very good.
Is this one of your inventions, or is there a recipe for this?
It's just porridge with stuff in.
Sure. I never thought to put tahini in porridge before.
It's delicious. It's a, I guess, you know, sort of nut buttery profile, works in the same way that peanut butter would, but it was very fucking nice.
That makes sense to me. Also, Bracken, are there videos of more Disney Princess Rory updates, or? What are you making?
I am making ramen. It's at a critical point. I'm gonna leave you alone now.
Okay.
Who else have we got? How was your day, Em?
It was good. What did I do today? I had counseling, and that was lovely. I really like my counselor right now.
You went to a
And
dance class?
yeah, I went to Andy's dance class. Oh man, that was really fun.
I have heard about this.
I was late because I'm bad at time, but oh my goodness, it was so good for me. I haven't done much dancing in months, and like, so fun. I love me some isolations. I might not have done any since your dance class, Frankie, actually, like many, many moons ago when we last did isolation.
That's so cool. Well, Andy, would you be at all interested in plugging your dance class?
Absolutely. So it's a series of now 5, because today was the first one, and there were 6. Which I planned and possibly sort of over-planned, and they're all kind of floating in my brain. It's a rather general view at isolation.
I don't have the energy or time.
Oh, I can't work out who is.
Bracken!
Hold on, I will.
Muted.
Sorry.
Sorted.
So yeah, today was the theme. The theme for today was torso. Next week is lower spine and the hips, mostly hips, because you know, hips. And then there will be arms, and then there will be legs, and then there will be a break because I'm moving, and then there will be 2 different ways of putting isolations together so that you can dance with different body parts doing different things at the same time, or one after the other, which is, you know, the focus of the 2.
That sounds absolutely excellent. Hi, Lisa.
It is on Zoom every Thursday, 6 p.m. UK time, 7 p.m. Central Europe.
Fantastic.
Angela, can you link that on the Storytime group, because I have somehow missed it and I didn't know about it. I would have quite liked to join, but I'll try to join the next one.
Cool.
Yeah. And Roger, if you would be able to post on the group, that would be wonderful. Okay.
Sure. I'll reshare it on the Storytime group. It was in COVID Dance, but yeah, things get lost there.
I don't. There's too much going on in COVID Dance.
Katie. What time is it, Katie?
It's massively overdue for story time.
Oh no! Okay, everybody. Right, everyone. Now. We have a couple of content warnings for this one. This is going to be a badass chapter. I think you're going to really like it, but a couple of important content warnings, so attention from all, please. We have a content warning for blood. A blood content warning. We also have a content warning for physical self-damage. I don't want to say self-harm because it's not in a kind of suicidal coping mechanism context, but somebody somebody does some physical damage to themselves. If either of those two things are going to be upsetting for you or things that you do not want to hear about, this is a good chance to tap out. Now, are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. 6. The door of blood and silver. When I was a child, breakfast was 20 minutes of absolute silence, seated across from Miss Wilder, who believed that conversation interfered with digestion and that jam and butter were only for holidays. After her departure, I joined Mr. Locke for breakfast at his enormous polished dining table, where I did my best to impress him with my good posture and ladylike silence. Then Jane arrived, and breakfasts became stolen coffee in a forgotten sitting room or jumbled attic room, where everything smelled of dust and sunlight, and bad could disperse fine bronze hairs on the armchairs without rebuke. At Brattleborough, breakfast was the splat of porridge ladled into tin bowls, the pale filtering of light from high windows, the click of the attendants' heels down the aisles. Good behaviour had granted me the right to join the murmuring flock of women who ate in the dining hall. I was seated that morning beside a mismatched pair of white women. One of them was old, narrow and pursed-looking, with her hair drawn into a bun so severe it tugged her eyebrows into little arches. The other was young and wide, with moist grey eyes and chapped lips. Both of them stared as I sat down. It was a familiar stare, a mistrustful, "what exactly are you?" stare that felt like a knife blade pressed to my flesh. But not that morning. That morning, my skin was shining plated armour. It was silver snakeskin. It was invulnerable. That morning, I was the daughter of Ewell Ian Scholar and Adelaide Lee Larson, and those eyes could not touch me. "You going to eat that?" The grey-eyed girl had apparently determined I wasn't so odd she couldn't ask for my biscuit. It sat half sunk in my porridge, a flattish lump the colour of fish scales. No. She took the biscuit, sucking the dampness out of it. "I'm Abby," she offered. "That's Miss Margaret." The older woman didn't look at me, but her face pinched further inward. "January Scholar," I said politely, but I thought January Scholar, like my father before me. The thought was a lantern glow in my chest, a brightness so real I thought it must be leaking from me like light around a closed door. Miss Margaret gave a faint, high-bred snort, perfectly calculated to be mistaken for a sniff. I wondered what she'd been before she was a madwoman. An heiress? A banker's wife? "And what kind of a name is that, exactly?" She still wasn't looking at me, but addressed her question to the air. The lantern in my chest glowed brighter. Mine. All mine. Given to me by my own true parents, who loved one another, who loved me, who had abandoned me somehow. The lantern glow dimmed a little, flickering in a sudden draught. What happened to that little stone house on the hillside, to the key, to my mother and father? I almost didn't want to know. I wanted to linger as long as I could in the fragile, fleeting past, in that brief happily ever after when I'd had a home and a family. Last night I'd stuffed the 10,000 doors beneath my mattress rather than read another page and risk losing it all. Abby was blinking her damp eyes into the sudden silence. I got a telegram from my brother this morning. I'm going home on Tuesday, or maybe Wednesday, he said. Margaret snorted again. Abby ignored her. Do you think you'll stay long? She asked me. No. There was too much to do. Finish my damn book, find Jane, find my father, write it all right again. To stay locked up here like some tragic orphan girl in a Gothic novel. Plus, if I stayed past dark, I was 3/4 certain a vampire would climb through my window and eat me. I had to find a way out. And wasn't I the daughter of Yule and Addie, born beneath the sun of another world? Wasn't I named after the god of in-betweens and passageways, the god of doors? How could I be locked away, really? My very blood seemed a sort of key, an ink with which I could write myself a new story. Ah, blood. A slow smile peeled my lips back over my teeth. No, I don't think so, I answered breezily. I've just got so much to do. Abby nodded contentedly and launched into a long and unlikely story about the picnic she would have when she arrived back home, and how her brother really missed her very much, and it wasn't his fault she was such a trying sister. We left the hall in the same grey lines. I tried to make my shoulders curve inward and my back stoop like everyone else's, and when Mrs. Reynolds and another nurse escorted me into my room, I said, "Thank you," in a soft, docile voice. Mrs. Reynolds' eyes flicked up to mine, then away. They did not cuff me to the bed when they left. I waited until their steps had clicked down the hall to the next locked door, then dove for my mattress. I ran my fingertips along the spine of my father's book, lightly, but left it where it lay. Instead, I found the cool silver of the coin from the city of Nîmes. It sat heavy in my palm, wider than a $50 and twice as thick. The Queen smiled up at me. Slowly, I scrubbed the edge of the coin against the rough cement stucco of the wall beside my bed. I held it back up to the light and saw that the smooth curve of the coin had been worn away, ever so slightly. I smiled, the desperate smile of a prisoner as she digs her escape tunnel, and pressed the coin back against the wall. By dinner, my arm muscles were wrung out rags and my finger joints ached where they curled around the coin. Except that it wasn't a coin anymore. There were 2 angled sides leading to a single point, with nothing left of the Queen's face except one wise eye in the centre. I kept scraping after dinner because I wanted to be sure it was sharp enough, and also because I was scared. But night was coming. I watched the light on my bare walls turn from rose to palest yellow to dim ash, and Havermeyer would return soon. Creeping like a penny dreadful monster along the halls, reaching his cold fingers out for me, drinking the warmth from my flesh. I rolled back my blankets, pressed bare feet to the floor, and crept to the locked door. The coin lay gleaming and thin in my palm, transformed into a tiny blade or a sharp silver pen nib. I touched it lightly to my fingertip, thought of Havermeyer's hungry eyes, and pressed down. By moonlight, blood looks like ink. I knelt and drew my finger across the floor in a shaky line, but the blood beaded and purled on the slick-polished tile. I squeezed my hand, forced the reluctant drops into a puddled, smeary tea, but I already knew it wouldn't work. It would take too much blood and too much time. I swallowed. I laid my left arm across my knees and tried to think of it as paper or clay or slate, something not alive. I touched the silver knife to my skin, right where the stringy muscle of my forearm joined up to my elbow. I thought, hold on, January, and began to write. It hurt less than I thought it would. No, that's a lie. It hurt precisely as much as you'd think to carve letters into your own flesh, deep enough for blood to boil up like red oil wells. It's just that sometimes pain is too unavoidable, too necessary to feel. The door. I was careful to cut my lines away from the ropey veins in the middle of my forearm, out of a dim sense that I might exsanguinate myself on the hospital floor and cut my whole escape attempt tragically short. But I was equally afraid of cutting too lightly, as if it might signal some secret hesitancy or unbelief. It's believing that matters, remember. The door opens for her. The coin edge bit and twisted around the period, and I believed it with all my shaken heart. The room did that same, almost familiar reshuffling of itself, a subtle wrenching, as if an invisible housewife were tugging at the corners of reality to shake out the wrinkles. I screwed my eyes shut and waited, hope thudding through my veins and dripping out onto the floor. God help me if it didn't work. In the morning, they'd find me lying in the curdling muck of my own blood. At least Havermeyer wouldn't have any life heat left to steal. The lock clicked. I opened my eyes, blinking through sudden exhaustion. The door swung inward just slightly, as if pulled by a faint breeze. I slouched forward and rested my forehead against the tile, letting waves of fatigue roll and crash over me. My eyes wanted to close. My ribs ached as if I'd swum to the bottom of the lake and back. But he was coming, and I couldn't stay. I limped back to the bed in a three-limbed crawl, smearing red behind me, and fumbled for my book. I hugged it close to me, just for a moment, breathing in that spice and ocean smell. It smelled exactly like my father's ancient, shapeless coat, which he left draped over the back of his chair at dinner whenever he was home. How had I never realised that before? I tucked the book beneath my arm, gripped the coin knife tight in my palm, and left. There was no threshold here, of course, but stepping from my room into the hall was still crossing from one world into another. I swept down the hall with my stiff gown rustling against my legs and blood dripping behind me in a long line of spatters. I thought absurdly of breadcrumb trails leading through dark fairy tale forests and quashed a slightly hysterical urge to laugh. I crept down 2 flights of stairs and into the pristine white of the front lobby. I passed doors with neat gold lettering on the glass, blinking blurring eyes at the titles. Dr. Stephen J. Palmer. I had an irrational urge to slip into his office and upend all his neat files and folders, shred all his careful notes, perhaps steal that hideous pen of his, but I kept padding forward. The entranceway was cool marble beneath my bare feet. I was reaching for the stately double-paned doors, already smelling summer grass and freedom, when I realised 2 things simultaneously. First, that I could hear raised voices echoing on the floor above, a rising clamour of alarm, and that I'd left a spattered red trail through the halls leading directly to the front door. And second, that there was a blurred figure standing on the other side of the door, drawn in shadow and moonlight. The tall, attenuated silhouette of a man. No. My legs went weak and slow, as if I were wading through knee-deep sand. The silhouette sharpened as it came closer. The doorknob turned, the door opened, and Havermeyer stood framed on the threshold. He had abandoned his cane and gloves, and his white spider hands hung naked by his sides. His skin was lambent and alien in the darkness, and I suddenly thought how strange it was that he seemed so human by daylight. His eyes widened as they saw me. He smiled, a predatory, life-hungry smile, and God help you if you've ever seen a smile like that on a human face. And I ran. The voices had grown louder. An electric light snapped and buzzed ahead of me. White-frocked nurses and staff were scurrying toward me, shouting and scolding. But I could feel Havermeyer behind me like a malevolent wind, and I kept running until I was nearly face to face with them. They slowed, hands raised in placating gestures, voices soothing. They seemed reluctant to touch me, and I had a brief disorientating vision of myself through their eyes. A feral, in-between girl with blood staining her nightgown and words carved like prayers into her flesh. Teeth bared, eyes fear-black. Mr. Locke's good girl had been replaced by someone else entirely. Someone who wasn't prepared to surrender. I dove sideways through an unlabeled wooden door. Brooms and buckets crashed around me in the dark, an ammonia and lye smell. A janitor's closet. A dangling pull cord turned on the light, and I jammed a stepladder inexpertly beneath the doorknob. Heroes were always doing that in my stories, but it looked much more tenuous in real life. Running footsteps pounded outside the door, and the knob gave a violent rattle, followed by swearing and shouting. An ominous thump shook the ladder. My pulse rocketed, and I fought the panicky whine in my throat. There was nowhere left to run, no doors left to open. Hold on, January. The stepladder made a worrying, splintery sound. I needed to run, far and fast. I thought of the blue door to the sea, of my father's world, of Samuel's world, of his cabin by the lake. I looked down at my left arm, thrumming now with pain like a marching band in the distance, and thought, why the hell not? I hesitated for half a second. It comes at a cost, my father had said. Power always does. How much would it cost to split the world open like this? Could I afford to pay it, shivering and bleeding in a broom closet? Come now, Miss Scala, a voice hissed through the door. How childish. It was a very patient voice, like a wolf circling a treed animal, waiting. I swallowed cold terror and began. I started high on my shoulder, where I could barely reach, and kept my letters tight and small. She writes a door. The thundering sounds on the closet door paused, and that cold voice said, out of my way. Then came harassed-sounding bickering, shuffling footsteps, and much stronger, frame-rattling thuds. Of blood. Where? My eyes felt distant in my skull, as if they longed to soar upward and leave my bleeding, hurting body on its own. I didn't have an address, couldn't even point to the place on a map, but it didn't matter. Believing is what matters. Willing. And silver. I curled the blade around the final letter and thought of Samuel. The new letters squashed up next to the first sentence I'd written, so that it all ran together in a single story I desperately, madly believed. She writes a door of blood and silver. The door opens for her. The stepladder gave a final, fatal crunch. The door pressed inward against the tumble of cleaning supplies and broken wood. But I didn't care, because at the same moment I felt the swirling, shifting madness of the world reshaping itself, followed by the most unlikely thing in the world, a fresh breeze against my back. It smelled of pine needles and cool earth and warm July lake water. I turned and saw a strange, gaping wound in the wall behind me, a hole that glinted with rust and silver. It was an ugly, crudely drawn thing, like a child's chalk sketch made real, but I recognized it for what it was. A door. The closet door was wedged halfway open, and a white-fingered hand was reaching around its edges. I scuttled backward, sliding through my own blood and realizing from the queer ache in my jaw that I was grinning, a fierce, flesh-rending grin, like Bad when he was a few seconds away from biting somebody. I felt the door at my back, a blessed absence, a pine-scented promise, and crammed myself through it, shoulders scraping raw against the rough-hewn edges. I fell backward into the swallowing darkness and watched as faces and hands swarmed into the closet, a many-armed monster reaching after me. Then the nothingness of the threshold ate me. I'd forgotten how empty it was. Empty isn't even the right word, because something that's empty might once have been full, and it was impossible that anything had ever existed in the threshold. I wasn't entirely sure I existed, and for a terrible moment I felt the edges of myself dissipating, unraveling. That moment scares me even now, with solid wood beneath me and warm sun on my face. But I felt the worn leather of the 10,000 doors beneath my blood-sticky fingers, and thought of my mother and father diving from world to world like rocks skipping across some vast black lake, unafraid of falling. Then I thought of Jane and Samuel and Bad, and then, as if their faces were a map unfurling in the void, I remembered where I was going. Rough edges pressed against me again, and a darkness formed that was infinitely less dark than the threshold. Musty wooden floorboards appeared beneath me. I fell forward and curled my fingernails against the floor as if I were clinging to a cliff face, the edges of my book pressing painfully, wonderfully against my ribs. My heart, which seemed to have disappeared in the threshold, thundered into existence again. Who's there? A shape moved across the floor, casting moon-edged shadows over me. Then, January. The voice was low and female, rolling through the vowels of my name in a fashion both foreign and familiar. The word impossible sprang to mind, but the past few days had fatally weakened my entire concept of what was and wasn't possible, and it slunk furtively away again. Oily golden lamp flared, and there she was. Short hair limned with lamplight, dress dishevelled, mouth slightly open as she knelt beside me. Jane! My head felt far too heavy. I laid it down and spoke to the floor. Oh, thank God you're here. Wherever here is. I know where I was aiming, but you never know with doors, do you? My words were soupy and slurred sounding in my ears, as if I was shouting underwater. The lamplight seemed to be dimming. But how did you get here? I think the more interesting question is how you got here. Here being the Zapier family cabin, by the way. The dryness of her tone felt brittle, forced. And what happened to you? There's blood everywhere. But I was no longer listening. I'd heard a sound from the shadowy edges of the room, a lurching, dragging sound followed by the click of claws on wood, and ceased to breathe. The footsteps padded closer, moving with an uneven hesitancy. Impossible. I raised my head. Bad limped into the light. One eye was swollen, his back leg was hovering and shaking above the ground, and his head hung low and haggard. For a stretched half-second he blinked at me, as if unsure it was really me. And then we dove toward one another. We collided, a desperate mess of dark limbs and yellow fur. He rooted around my neck and armpits as if trying to find a place he could crawl into, making a hoarse, puppyish whine I'd never heard from him before. I wrapped my arms around him, resting my forehead against his shivering shoulder and saying all the stupid, inane things you say when your dog is hurt. I know, love, it's all right. I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Some jagged, broken thing in my chest began to mend. Jane cleared her throat. I hate to interrupt, but should there be anything else coming out of this hole? I went still. Bad's tail ceased its thumping against the floor. Scuffling, creeping sounds echoed behind me like something crawling closer. I looked back over my shoulder at my door, a ragged black tear, as if reality had been careless and caught itself on a loose nail, and saw, or thought I saw, a malevolent gleaming in its depths, like a pair of hungry eyes. He's coming for me. My voice was calm, almost detached, while my thoughts ran in terrified circles. Havermeyer would emerge, white and wicked, and take whatever it was he wanted from me. Others would follow once they gathered their courage. They'd lock me up forever if there was anything left of me to lock up, and probably Jane too. Certainly nothing good would happen to an African woman found in the company of a clinically insane fugitive at midnight. And who would take care of poor, battered Bad? I think I have to close it. Anything open can be closed. Had my father discovered that when the door closed between the city of Nien and my mother's field? He'd never known why or how it happened, but then my father was a scholar. His tools were careful study and rational evidence and years of documentation. My tools were words and will, and I was out of time. I found my coin knife, so blood-crusted it no longer gleamed silver. I pulled my knees under my belly and laid my poor, aching arm before me. I pressed the coin to my skin a final time, blinking a little against the weird blurring and unblurring of the room. No! January, what are you? Jane tugged my hand away. Please. I swallowed, swaying a little. Please trust me. Believe me. There was no reason in the world she should. Anyone else would have happily dragged me back to the doctor's with a note pinned to my chest, suggesting they lock me in a small room without any sharp objects for the next century or so. This was the true violence Mr. Locke had done to me. You don't really know how fragile and fleeting your own voice is until you watch a rich man take it away as easily as signing a bank loan. The scuffling sounds grew louder. Her eyes flicked to the hole in the wall behind me and to the congealed lettering on my arm. A strange expression moved across her face. Shrewdness, perhaps? A wary understanding? And she let go of my hand. I chose a bare, unbloodied patch of skin and began to carve a single word. J. U. Movement in the blackness. The harsh sound of breathing, a white spider hand reaching out of the darkness toward me. Just. The door opens just for her. I felt the world pull itself back together, like skin pulling tight around a scar. The blackness receded, the white hand spasmed. There was a terrible, inhuman screech. And then I was staring at nothing but a patch of unremarkable cabin wall. The door was closed. Then my cheek was pressed to the floor and Jane's cool hand was on my forehead. Bad limped closer and lay down with his spine pressed against me. My last wavering sight was of 3 odd, pale objects lying in a row on the floorboards. They looked like the white ends of some unusual mushroom, or maybe candle stubs. I'd already closed my eyes and begun to drift into a pain-hazed sleep when I recognized them for what they were. 3 white fingertips. I was somewhere else for a while. I don't know where exactly, but it felt like another kind of threshold, lightless and endless, a silent galaxy without stars or planets or moons. Except I wasn't passing through, I was just suspended, waiting. I remember a vague sense that it was a nice place, free of monsters and blood and pain, and I'd quite like to stay. But something kept intruding. A warm, breathing something that nestled against my side and rooted in my hair, making small, whimpering sounds. Bad. Bad was alive, and he needed me. So I rose up out of the black and opened my eyes. Hello, you. My tongue was cottony and thick, but Bad's ears pricked. He made that whining sound in his chest again, somehow inching closer to me despite the absence of spare inches, and I laid my cheek on the warm slab of his shoulder. I made a motion to throw my arms around him, but desisted with a small yelp. It hurt. Everything hurt. My bones felt bruised and aching, as if they'd been forced to bear some impossible load. My left arm was too hot and throbbing, wrapped tightly in sheets of strips of sheet. Even my blood beat sluggishly in my ears. In all, it seemed a fair price to pay for rewriting the very nature of space and time and crafting a door of my own making. I blinked away an urge to laugh or possibly cry and looked around. It was a small cabin, like Samuel had said, and a little forlorn. The stacks of blankets were musty. The cook stove was rusting in orange flakes. The windows were cobweb clogged. But the smell, oh, the smell. Sunshine and pine, lake water and wind. It was as if all the smells of summertime had soaked into the walls. It was the perfect scientific opposite to Brattleboro. It was only then that I noticed Jane, sitting at the foot of my bed with a steaming tin mug in her hands, watching Bad and me with a quirk at the corner of her mouth. Something about her had changed in the week we'd been apart. Maybe it was her clothes. Her usual stodgy grey dress had been replaced by a calf-length skirt and loose cotton blouse. Or maybe it was the sharp glitter of her eyes, as if she'd dispensed with a mask I hadn't known she was wearing. I found myself suddenly uncertain. I looked at Bad's back as I spoke. Where did you find him? On the beach, in that little cove past the house. He was... She hesitated, and I glanced up to see that the quirk in her mouth had flattened out. Not in very good shape. Half drowned, beaten, bloody. It looked to me like someone dropped him over the bluff and hoped he'd drown. She lifted one shoulder. I did the best I could for him. I don't know if that leg will ever be right. My fingers found clipped patches of fur and stubbly lines of stitches. His back leg had been splintered and wrapped. I opened my mouth, but no words emerged. There are times when thank you is so inadequate, so dwarfed by the magnitude of the debt that the words wilt in your throat. Jane, in case you ever read this, thank you. I swallowed. And how are you here? As you might have surmised, Mr. Locke called me down to his office to inform me that my services would no longer be needed. I became agitated and was escorted from the grounds by that damned eerie valet of his, without even packing my things. I came back that night, of course, but you were already gone, a failure for which I am, her nostrils flared, deeply sorry. She gave her shoulders a shake. Well, Brattleboro is a white institution, I'm told. I was not permitted to visit you. So I went to the Zapier boy, figuring Italian is close enough to white, but his visitation was also denied. Apparently, he delivered my package by more efficient means. Her smile reappeared and widened enough to show the slim gap between her teeth. Quite a devoted friend, isn't he? I didn't find it necessary to respond to that. She continued primly, and a very nice young man. He gave me this address, a place to think and plan, a place to sleep since I was no longer welcome at Locke House. I'm sorry. My voice was small, feeble sounding in my ears. Jane snorted. I'm not. I have despised that house and its owner since the moment I arrived. I tolerated it solely on the basis of a bargain your father and I struck. He asked me to protect you in exchange for something I wanted very badly. Her expression turned inward, burning with a kind of bottomless, bleak rage that made my breath catch. She swallowed it away, which he is no longer in a position to provide. I wrapped my arm tighter around Bad and made my voice as even and neutral as I could. So you'll be leaving now? Going home? I saw her eyes widen. Now? And leave you sick and injured, hunted by God's only know what? Julian might have broken the terms of our deal, but you and I have an entirely separate arrangement. I blinked at her, stupidly. Jane's expression softened as much as I'd ever seen it. I am your friend, January. I will not abandon you. Oh. Neither of us spoke for a time. I let myself fall back into a sweaty half-doze. Jane prodded the cook stove to life and reheated her coffee. She returned to the edge of the bed, scooting Bad's hind end aside and perching beside me. She held The 10,000 Doors, ruffled-looking, smeared with rust-red stains, on her knees, one thumb stroking the cover. You should sleep. But I found I couldn't, quite. Questions buzzed and hummed in my ears, gnat-like. What had my father promised Jane? How had they met, really? And what was the book to her? And why had my father come to this grey, dull world at all? I fidgeted beneath the quilt until Bad sighed at me. Do you think you could read to me? I just finished the 4th chapter. Jane's gap-toothed grin flashed at me. Of course. She opened the book and began to read. Chapter 5. On Loss. Heaven. Hell. No one really remembers their own origins. Most of us possess a kind of hazy mythology about our early childhood, a set of stories told and retold by our parents, interwoven with our blurred baby memories. They tell us about the time we nearly died crawling down the stairs after the family cat, about the way we used to smile in our sleep during thunderstorms, our first words and steps and birthday cakes. They tell us 100 different stories, which are all the same story. We love you and have always loved you. But Yule Ian never told his daughter those stories. You will permit me the continued cowardice of third-person narration, I hope. It is foolish, but I find it lessens the pain. What, then, does she remember? Not those first few nights when her parents watched the rise and fall of her ribcage with a kind of terrified elation, nor the hot, raised feeling of fresh tattoos spiraling beneath their skin, spelling out new words, mother, father, family. Nor the way they sometimes looked at one another in the pre-dawn glow, after hours of pacing and rocking and singing nonsense songs in half a dozen languages, with all their emotions written raw on their faces. A kind of stunned exhaustion, a slight hysteria, an unspeakable longing to simply lie down, and knew themselves to be the most profoundly lucky souls in 10,000 worlds. She is unlikely to recall the evening her father climbed back up to the little stone house and found her sleeping beside her mother on the hillside. She was open-mouthed, naked except for the cotton cloth tied around her waist, a faint breeze brushing through her curls. Addie was curled around her, a golden white curve like a lioness or a nautilus, nestled into her milk-sweet breath. It was nearly the end of summer, and the evening shadows were creeping toward the two of them on chill tiptoes, but hadn't reached them yet. The two of them were still shining, untouched, whole. Yule stood on the hillside watching them, feeling an exultant, vaulting joy edged with melancholy, as if he were already mourning its loss, as if he knew he could not live in heaven forever. It hurts me to speak of such things now. Even now, as I write this, cowering in my tent in the foothills outside Ulaanbaatar, alone but for the scratching of my pen and the ice-rhymed howling of wolves, I am grinding my teeth against waves of pain, an ache that settles in my limbs and poisons my marrow. Do you remember the time you asked me about your name and I said your mother liked it? You left annoyed, dissatisfied, the line of your jaw so precisely like hers I could hardly breathe. I tried to return to my work but couldn't. I crawled into bed, racked and shuddering, thinking of the shape of your mother's mouth when she said your name. January. I missed dinner that night and left the next morning before dawn. You were rousted from bed to see me off, and your face through the carriage window, sleep-tousled, vaguely accusing, haunted me for months afterward. In the pain of my loss, I gave you the pain of absence. I cannot fill that empty place now. I cannot dive backward in time and force myself to fling open the carriage door and run back to you, gather you close to me and whisper in your ear, "We love you. We have always loved you." I have left it too late, and you are nearly grown. But I can give you at least an accounting of the facts, long overdue. This is why you were raised in the pine-pocked snows of Vermont rather than the stone islands of the Americo Sea in the world of the written. This is why your father's eyes touch your face only rarely and lightly, as if you were a tiny sun that might blind him. This is why I am nearly 6,000 miles away from you, hand cramping from the cold, alone but for the twin harpies of despair and hope following always by my side. This is what happened to Yule Ian Scholar and Adelaide Lee Larson after the birth of their daughter, in the raw spring of the written year, 6922.
That's alive! I'm so glad we can stay friends.
You don't think I'd really do something that terrible to you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you let a bear die once. Of course you might let a dog die.
You let a bear die.
I'm so sorry. Well, I felt I had to make up for it.
Yeah. Also, you said there at the end, what was it? This is how something happens.
Mm-hmm.
Go on.
Go on.
I wish you could have heard the profoundly disappointed sigh that Martin gave from the sofa when I closed the book.
Yeah. Martin, I love you, Martin.
Martin, thank you for doing that on behalf of all of us.
I almost thought it was in the middle of a sentence there.
It's not. There's a space. There's a space.
You miss Nick growling. I mean, there are usually spaces in the middle of sentences. There are usually spaces between words.
Between each word.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is you did not stop in the middle of a word.
I didn't.
Okay.
Well done. Such restraint.
That is a low bar.
Glad somebody.
Generally, sentences have full stops, not spaces at the end of them.
Want to get technical, yeah.
And I will say, maybe stop giving Frankie more ideas, like stopping mid-word, like she needs to find more ways to torture us.
Sweetheart.
You could have stopped in the middle of a word. It could have been anticipate.
You're suggesting we don't love it, Em.
No, if that word ever comes up in this book, that's what the ending is going to be, and it's going to suck.
Nick. Come on.
Gratification.
Hi, Martin.
Hi, Martin.
Look who I found.
That's a face.
For real though, I really loved that line about
Life is not a secret. What the fuck? That's not us, is it?
Very good timing.
What was that noise?
Sounds like the X-Files. No, it sounded like Strange But True. I don't know if anyone remembers that show. From like the mid-90s.
I feel like I remember the title.
Mm-hmm.
What just happened?
Such drama this week
What?
today.
Probably an ad started on another tab.
Oh, possibly.
but yeah, that was my favorite line. I loved that passage. That was beautiful.
What was your favorite line?
just about like watching January in terrified elation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's all so good. I love the reunion with Bad.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Bracken, I had your face like on the bottom of my gallery view, and like as soon as the claws started clicking, and you were like catch up crew. I wish you could have
There's a dog in the room. I'm always like that, regardless of whether I thought it was dead or not. I'm like,
you were so excited that I legit nearly started crying. I was
I nearly started crying. I was like, it's bad. You'd filled us all really well. I thought that he was gone.
Yes.
I really hoped he wasn't, but I thought he was dead.
I'm so glad.
Nobody said dead, so I assumed he wasn't.
Andrada.
If nobody ever says it, it didn't happen.
I mean, her dad's disappeared. We don't know if he's dead or not. They just keep saying he's dead, but they could be lying.
No, he's definitely dead.
I mean, if he isn't dead, then he'll come back and then he'll be like, I'm so proud of you, and then he'll die immediately.
The vampire?
It's a Detective Pikachu. Oh God, bad. We're using the phrase rhymes
Detective
with.
Pikachu.
Think about it. Just
Pikachu. No.
Yeah. Bad rhymes with Pikachu.
Hold on, listen, wait for a second, you chaotic bunch. We should say goodbye to the catcher.
I thought you were going to say we should defend Detective Pikachu because it was a surprisingly delightful movie.
I've not seen Detective Pikachu.
Wait, that's an actual thing?
Oh yeah, it was fun and ridiculous. If you want something to like take your mind off of our world, you know.
It's got Ryan Reynolds as Pikachu.
Really?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, and Bill Nye.
Yes.
Catch up crew.
Bye, catch-up crew.
Catch-up crew. Goodbye. Goodbye, catch-up crew. Love you. Bye.